Hi everyone, my name's Jacob Norris. Some of you may know me as Pure Polygons. I'm the co-founder of Sierra Division, and I wanted to quickly kind of go over some of the initial features you need to activate in order to get everything working properly with the oil rig. I have version 5.0.3 of the Unreal Engine here in front of me, and it'll be many of the same settings you need to adjust for engine 4.27 as well as 5.1 and beyond. I'll be sure to point out any differences as I go through. But this is a fresh new project, so I've created a new project and I've downloaded the oil rig directly from the marketplace and added it here as the pack. So the very first thing you need to do when you set up the project is you'll want to go up to Edit and Project Settings, and in version 4.0 you may have to just go to Settings and you'll see Project Settings here, and we will want to turn on Generate Mesh Distance Fields, so I can just do a search here at the top, and this may already be enabled in your project, so just make sure that this check mark is turned on. And it'll ask you to restart the engine, but we have a couple other settings we want to enable, and we'll go through those before we restart. So generating the mesh distance fields is what's going to help your ocean shader produce proper foam on the surface of the ocean. So if you have foam issues, then it may be that your generate mesh distance fields is turned off. So we'll leave that turned on, and the next setting we want to go to is settings and plugins. And in here, we're going to go ahead and turn on the water plugin. So this is a Unreal plugin that comes with the engine, and we've used it as the foundation for our ocean and built on top of it. So you'll just check that mark here, and it tells you it's experimental, and yes, you do want to enable it. Again, it asks you to restart, but we'll just avoid that for now. And then the very last setting is actually going to be our virtual textures. So you'll see enable virtual texture support, and some of our assets use what are called virtual textures on them to reduce the number of draw calls by having multiple texture sets in a single material. And so we go ahead and check this and enable it. One setting you will probably want to adjust for your project also is auto virtual texture size. So it's default set to 400 or 4096, but this may cause some of your shaders and materials to have issues, because when you bring in a new texture and it's a 4096 texture, it's going to assume automatically that it's a virtual texture. If we just set this up by one more value to 4097, then you can import a 4096 texture set and have no issues. It'll still import as a standard texture. But then anything above and beyond, such as your virtual texture, even containing two UDIMs in there, and you can Google UDIMs or UDIMs if you're unfamiliar with the term or you haven't used virtual textures before. But two of them will make your texture larger and larger and larger, and so then this will recognize that you're importing virtual textures just by updating that single number right there. So we can go ahead and close that now. All of our settings are properly enabled, and we will restart the engine, and I'll check back in with you once we get up and running again. So you'll notice after the initial restart that it took a little bit of time to get going again, and that's just because it had to update all those settings, the virtual texture streaming, the mesh distance fields, as well as compiling a few shaders. You can see now in the bottom right it still says preparing 9056 shaders, and so this is just a common thing that happens whenever you're starting up a new project in Unreal, and it shouldn't occur again when you restart the next time, so your project should load much faster from here on out. If we wanted to take a look really quickly at getting the water set up, I think a lot of you will be able to understand a bit better how the oil rig project looks on its own and dealing with the meshes, but the water may be trickier. So let's take a look and see how we can get that going. The first thing that we want to take a look at is coming into our oil rig folder here and the water effects folder, and we'll add in the ocean volume, so the blueprint ocean volume, and this is going to be what creates the underwater effect for us. From here, if we click this plus button at the top, and in Unreal version 4.27, you'll have the add content settings here on the left, and it's going to be the same idea. You'll just click this and start to search, and we're going to search for water. And you'll see two things. We're going to get the water body ocean, which has these squiggly lines here, and the water zone, which looks like a bit of a wave made out of a polygon. And in Unreal version 4.27, that's going to say water mesh actor. So just make sure you look for water mesh actor in 427, and we're going to add both of these things to our scene. So we'll get the water body ocean, and we will also come back over here and get the water zone or the water mesh actor, depending on your engine version. And after we add both of these things into the scene, you'll notice that in the background here, it starts to get some kind of waves and such. If we hide our terrain, you'll see that the ocean is in the scene now, but it's got this kind of ring around it, like this hole here where we aren't able to see any water. And so you just need to grab the points on this little spline where this hole is. So if I zoom out, you can see that there's this spline going around this whole section. And this is if you wanted to have something underground, or you wanted to hide an area of the water so that you can import things and set things up that would clip into it, so that you don't have to worry about having like ocean and water in places that you don't want it. And so if we want the ocean across the entire space here, for whatever reason, you can't just simply delete it. And since this is using the Unreal Engine Water plugin as a foundation, we haven't been able to change that setting ourselves personally. So like deleting some of the spline points might work, but if you delete too many, you see then it completely disappears. So the best bet is just to simply squish these points down until it no longer affects your scene. And the current water that's in here right now is the one that comes as a default setup for the scene. So if we just select it now and come over to our details here on the right, we can scroll down to the waves source, and currently it's set to water waves asset reference. If you just drop this down here and you see the water waves asset, then in this section we can actually click on it and search for the Gertzner Waves oil rig. We've provided both a stormy oil rig and a standard oil rig water surface. And this changes the water surface setup, how the waves are forming, and the general shape of the water. And you can see the stormy one's going to be a bit more wild and a bit more intense. So if we come back to the standard oil rig and we scroll down a bit further, we may need to crunch this in a little bit more or adjust that to update the settings to match the new wave system here. We can also grab this and just move it off a ways. So I'll click one of the points, hold Control and select them, and just move this off kind of in the distance out of our way. If anyone's aware of a way to remove the necessity to have these spline points in the scene, that would be wonderful, so that we no longer have to have these spline points and we can just have a solid ocean for everybody. One more thing to point out as a bug: if you do have a landscape in your scene in version 5.0, that's what's going to help this ocean to load properly. So apparently in version 5.0 you don't require the landscape and the ocean will still be there. But in version 5.1 and forward, if you don't have a landscape in the scene, then the ocean won't load. So I'm kind of giving this tutorial for 3 engine versions at once and giving you some ideas on what to check in case you experience any bugs. But here is the last setting I wanted to show you really quickly. If we just select this ocean again and keep scrolling down here in our details panel, you'll see the water material. And if we just stay here in our water effects folder and come to materials, we have this material instance, oil rig ocean, and we can drag and drop that over the main water material here. And for the underwater post-process volumetrics, you can either search for it or you'll see it right here, the material instance water volumetrics. And so this is just a variation of the one that also comes with the scene that we've provided, which is the master material. And so editing these water volumetric materials or this material instance ocean rig here is going to allow you to change all those settings for the surface of the water. And so you'll notice a couple funny things happening, and as I update the position of this water body ocean, now it's fixed a lot of those strange features. I just selected water body ocean and moved it up, and it looks like I have 2 water zones in here. That may be affecting something as well. But you can see it provides a fairly decent surface for you to work with as a default setting from what we've created for it. And you can just open this up and change any of those features that are in here. For the normal settings, the distant water speed, there's distant material settings, and then there's near ocean material settings. So there's like a different amount of foam in the distance. There's the settings for like how far the foam can be seen around you. So if I start to zoom out, you'll actually see the foam will start disappearing at a certain distance. You can see it's no longer visible there, but it's still visible below me. And these are just some nice sort of optimization features and quick settings that we've added in that you're able to change there in that same material. Now, if you want to get things floating on top of the water, as you saw in our cinematic, we had the buoy that was floating on there. If we come back into our water effects and find the blueprints folder, we've included the blueprint for that buoy that was in the scene, and we can just drag and drop this right here into the water. Let me bring it above the water here like this. All right. And you'll see foam is building up around it as it's hitting the water and going into the water, and that's thanks to those generate mesh distance fields that we've set up. Now, if you hit play, you'll give it a second to load, and you'll see that the buoy is already able to float in the scene and everything works properly. You can easily open up this same blueprint buoy that we've provided and just replace the buoy asset for anything you'd like. There's a few different settings for how the mesh is going to float, like the buoyancy for it and some things like that. But here as an example, if we just grab this static mesh and we can replace it with one of the barrels that we have in the scene. So maybe just one of these plastic barrels, something like this is fine. And we compile that and save it. Now if we minimize this, you'll see there's still actually some shaders being compiled. It's starting to get those working now. But then if we click play, this should actually float too as a default setting. See, the weight of it and the buoyancy hasn't been set yet. So it doesn't match the settings that we had on the buoy. And so it's kind of freaking out because it's so buoyant that it's just bouncing right off the surface as if like it's a magnet that's put up against the opposite facing side of a magnet. That's kind of fun. Let me back out of here for now. But so that's how you can control the settings is per asset there's going to be different weights and different setups for that. Let me find a couple of those features. So here's the mass. We've set that individually per asset. So this mass right now is set to 500, and you want to make sure gravity is enabled on there. And if we select our buoyancy settings, you'll see this tab here for buoyancy data. And in here, there's something called pontoons. And so the pontoons, they're not able to be visualized, unfortunately, on the asset here in the viewport. But if you use the grid to kind of determine where to position them, the way that the pontoons work is it sets up basically little bubbles, little pontoons that would go around the asset and allow you to control the location of where the pontoons are, as well as the radius, such as the size of each pontoon. And so these settings is what worked for us to get the buoy floating and looking accurate. And after you set your pontoons up, then there's a lot of other features here that just take some time to kind of tweak and play with in order for them to get accurate results with each of the assets you're trying to work with. It took us a little bit of time to get it working properly on the buoy, but after it did, we found that it provided really nice results for us. So don't give up, give it a try, and you'll find what works for your asset. From this point, you can really easily just go to the maps folder, and if you want to use any of the default maps we provided, just go ahead and pop open the Oil Rig Cinematic, which is going to be a bit more performance intensive, so you don't probably want to use this for real-time purposes, but this is the map that we took a lot of our screenshots from, with just a few more samples per pixel on the ray trace settings, but otherwise everything else is the same inside of there. And then the Oil Rig Optimize has a few less real-time lights in it, and it's just using screen space reflections and a few other features that make it run a bit faster. So you can pop those open now that you've got all your settings working properly. You know how to add water to your projects, and you should be able to have a lot of fun with this asset. If you guys start working with it and you create some really cool stuff, we're always happy to check out what you've been doing. You can tag us on Twitter at Sierra_Division, and we'd be really happy to actually be able to repost whatever you're creating and just share with other people the cool stuff that you're coming up with our assets. Like, we love checking out what everyone's doing, so please feel free to tag us, follow us on social media, and we're looking forward to seeing what everybody does with it. Thanks so much, everyone.